Hello! Magandang hapon po sa lahat. Welcome to the February 2022 edition of the UP-SLIS webinar series organized by the UP School of Library and Information Studies. Welcome, students and teachers of Library and Information Science, information professionals, and all our friends in the Philippines and around the world. I am Drijpal Reyes, a faculty member from UP-SLIS and your host and moderator for this webinar. This webinar is in high definition or HD. For an optimal viewing experience and to ensure you can read the text in the presentation slides, please check and adjust the settings of this live stream to HD. Right now, you may also check the audio and adjust the volume to a comfortable listening level. You can also watch this webinar live on our YouTube channel and our FB page, UPSLIS. You can also watch at our official channel on Twitch TV, twitch.tv/UPSLIS. This webinar is still part of our hashtag Webinar Wednesday that we started July last 2020. The webinars are also part of the celebration of the 60th anniversary of UPSLIS. Before we continue, let me explain the mechanics for today's events. If you have any questions, you can send them at any time during the webinar. To post your questions, go to slido.com. That's www.slido.com and type in the code SLISPDA or hashtag SLISPDA. Again, that's slido.com with code SLISPDA. We will not entertain questions posted in the chat or comment section. Again, to post your questions, go to slido.com and type in the code SLISPDA. We will show the website and code on screen throughout the talk. Alternatively, you can also use the QR code shown on screen to go to the questions page. We would also love to hear your thoughts about today's webinar. Please watch out for the announcement containing the link for this webinar's evaluation. In the evaluation form, you can also suggest future topics that you would like us to discuss. You may also request for certificates of participation through our evaluation link. If in case you miss portions of this live webinar, you may view this as a Facebook video or check our YouTube and Twitch channels. Okay, that's it for the mechanics. Let's get things moving. So last month, we started the year with a truly educational talk on Philippine women and the archives. This February, we are continuing our conversations on archives. This Heart's Month with Akin ka na lang, a talk on PDA. Hindi public display of affection, ha? Although we will be learning how to keep things that matters and when to let go, today we'll be talking about personal digital archiving with Sir Jonathan. Jonathan Isip is a full-time archives, faculty member, information officer, and graduate program coordinator of the UP School of Library and Information Studies. They work in partnership with the system administrator to facilitate technology adoption, and they advise on data privacy matters in the school. They graduated with a Bachelor of Library and Information Science, magna cum laude, from UPSLIS in 2015, and a Master of Arts in Archives and Records Management with merit from University College London in 2018. Their areas of research are on records management, data privacy, information governance, digital preservation, as well as emerging technologies for information science. Nathan is a records management and data privacy consultant, as well as one of the creators of the Archives podcast and video series For the Record. Everyone, we are honored to have with us our guest this afternoon, Professor Jonathan Isip. Good afternoon, Sir Nathan.
All right. Hello, hello. And let me just get set up with my slides. All right. So, welcome everyone. And I hope you are having a happy new year and a blessed Imbolc. All right. So, let's get started with our talk. Let me just remove the QR code so that you can actually see me. All right. All right. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we're talking all about PDA. So like the chat, it's not personal display of affection. It's all about personal digital archiving. Personal archives are rather challenging to discuss as they are unique to each person, from journal entries and diary entries It's the little notes and messages you exchange with friends, photographs you take for whatever reason, whether to remember a place you visited, a selfie to check how you look for the day, or even a spur of the moment proof of life. Um, Creating records is an intrinsic part of our daily routine and defines us as individuals. Today, the internet and the World Wide Web have made public these ingredients that make up the I, the we, the you, that have been traditionally hidden, now running wild and free in our tweets, status updates, snaps, IG stories, and so on. These near spontaneous moments of sharing text, photographs, videos, music form a huge part of our digital identity, which in actual fact may or may not reflect our larger identity. And so we arrive at the title of our talk, Akin ka na lang. Mine. To whom do the records we create, the records that evidence our personality and identity belong, especially in this modern world of sharing? Why do we create them? Why do we want to keep them? Are we keeping them to ourselves or to share with others? Do we keep them now to be shared later? Maybe to reminisce about the past with our friends or to bore our kids with endless stories of what things were like in our time? Or is it something deeply personal, records that you rely on to define and reinforce your sense of self? A bold yet private statement that shouts, "This is who I am." As with any other act of record keeping, understanding the who and the why is key when deciding the what and the how of your personal archives. So I invite you now to do hop into our Slido page at slido.com/SLISPDA because I would love to know what you keep your personal records for. What motivates you to preserve your personal digital archives? So let's take a few minutes to have a look at what people are saying on our Slido page. So let's see what people are doing. So people are saying it's for nostalgia, it's all about memories. There's the keyword of remembering. And again, it's all about what these records mean to yourself. But then we also see things like for the future. And then um, this discussions on ownership and both the pride of ownership, but also passing it on to maybe our children, to maybe our family members. And um, one comment here was mga kasama sa photo. So again, to keep commenting, I'll just leave this up for a few more moments to see how you feel about your personal archives. And then we also have here, it's the meaning behind the documents. I have an interesting discussion about that later on when we talk of metadata and why it's really important to use metadata. Otherwise, we lose a lot of meaning on our records if they are just taken at face value. All right. So ine-empower ang what? Ang sarili, ang mga kasama natin. So really good answers. And the everlasting dilemma of records on Facebook and how we actually handle those types of records. Upload, hashtag delete Facebook, and so on. And actually, again, when we discuss some of the strategies, I'll be giving some recommendations in passing on really what the best option is when dealing with these types of media. All right. So really interesting responses from everyone. Thank you for commenting and hopping on to our Slido page. And it's as you can see, everyone has their own reasons. Fight surveillance capitalism. All right. And again, it's about that privacy of our records and us wanting to keep the records to ourselves. All right. So give me just a moment, please. And hello, I'm back with you now. Um, Throughout the course of this lecture, we will be discussing and looking at different strategies and tricks to preserve your digital records. And also, it's all about putting you in the mindset of undergoing the digital preservation process. We'll be looking at common files, so photographs, text documents, videos. Music collections are a bit problematic, especially now that a lot of people use Spotify and Apple Music, and you can't really download those kinds of media. But again, these are things that we have to consider and that we have to think about. And yeah, we'll also explore common concerns and mistakes. So let's get started. Going back to my first question, as our confused friend in this slide is, who are you preserving the records for? Unlike physical letters, diaries, and photographs, there is no mahiwagang baul or grandma's magic chest for people to find your digital records 10 years. Heck, you'll even be lucky if people find and are able to access your digital records 5 years from now. Social media websites go down, go out of business, change their business model. So I'm sure you remember what happened to Friendster, Multiply if you're old enough, MySpace even. Um, and who knows, Facebook has been around for so many years now. I think they've been around more than 12, 14 years. So what would happen if Facebook ever disappears? Or then again, as people are saying on our Slido page, what happens if Facebook decides to take over all of your records? So that's also another consideration. But like I said, it's really hard um, to just leave records be and then hope that 5 years from now you'll be able to access them. I remember having to open a CD that a friend sent me a few weeks ago, and then it took me quite a few minutes to find my CD drive so that I am able to open the CD and look at its contents. And just that's just the hardware. We'll be lucky if we are using the same software 5 years from now. I'm sure you remember the shift from .doc to .docx, where Microsoft decided to change for a good reason um, their document formats. It was for a good reason, but it was not without a lot of problems, especially when it comes to losing formatting and losing a lot of the layouts that you have in your documents. So you have to continually consider that. And hence, our first rule of digital preservation, which is that digital preservation is an ongoing activity. You can't just leave your files be in the hope that there'll be someone else's problem another time. As with any other object, digital files have a habit of becoming chaotic the longer you ignore them. Um, Much like piles of paperwork accumulating on your desk, I bet you have a bunch of files lying unsorted on your desktop or downloads folder. So, as you can see in this particular um, photo, this is not uncommon. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It's messy, but again, it's that consciousness of what files exactly do I have? Why do I keep them there? Why is my downloads folder? Why is my desktop this massive dumping file for my files? Um, Nobody expects the downloads folder to be a neat place unless you're really obsessed with keeping things neat. However, this could quickly become a problem if you are searching a file from 6 months ago and then you have to go through what 300, 600, 1,000 different files, and then you can't even remember its file name. The computer takes some time to look for it. Um, it might even cause your computer to crash if you don't have a powerful enough hardware to handle the indexing and the searching for a large folder. Periodically evaluating what you have, this is the first step, um, and why you are keeping them, as well as moving them into a recognizable structure, does wonders not just for preservation, but also for your peace of mind. Make organization a habit and don't let things pile up. And that, of course, brings us to our next point. It's really important to have definite goals that are clearly communicated with everyone involved. Um, Earlier on, I asked you what motivates you to preserve your personal digital archives. Having definite goals that are clearly communicated with everyone involved, um, ensures that the meaning and our motivations behind keeping these records is expressed not just for us, but also to the others that we mean to share it with. It is important to clearly understand why you are keeping personal records, as this will define your preservation strategy. For example, if the records that you are keeping are primarily photographs, of family gatherings, trips, birthdays, holidays, and so on, that are intended for sharing within a family unit or even within a group of friends, then a network storage system and a strategy that facilitates this type of sharing makes a lot more sense than in the case of an individual whose records are things like mostly selfies, meals of the day, what they are currently doing, personal journal entries. If they don't like blogging, maybe they just want to type in the notepad or something similar. Then a personal structure that is only accessible by them is a lot more reasonable than this big fancy network storage. So it's one of the big questions is that is your goal to share or to hide? Um, and then there's this understanding and then deliberation of what files are you actually keeping, especially regarding the purpose of the file. Um, are the files in your downloads folder primarily things that you found interesting or cute or memeable? Would these files be better located in something like Pinterest or a similar mood board? So there are a lot of apps to perform this function. Is it better to be stored there so that you have this whole concept wall rather than being dumped into your downloads folder or some um, random inspirational stuff folder? Would these files actually mean anything to you 6 months from now, much less years later? Or are the majority of your stuff actually reports from school or work that are better kept in your office's official storage systems? And then here we start getting the notion of should there be a separation of my personal records, my personal digital archives, versus the official archives of my institution, whether that's school, whether that's for work, and so on. And then there's also the distinction between archives, the records that we want to keep, and then the day-to-day records that we need to do, maybe submitting a piece of homework, maybe submitting a report that you need to have your boss sign. And again, it's that differentiation and being able to identify the boundaries between those records that's important. We can't keep everything. We don't have the space, we don't have the money, we don't have the time to manage it. And so um, we really need to make this type of differentiation. There's also the things like unavoidable software updates and installers that don't have the common decency to delete themselves after you've installed the update. And oftentimes, a lot of the clutter in downloads folders will be those kinds of files that are really ephemeral and temporary and should have been deleted a long time ago. One good trick to do will be to assess your files. Um, Using file statistics software is a great way to understand not just what files take up the most space in your storage, but also to evaluate the type of files that you have. For example, you might discover that you have mostly documents over photographs. So maybe you're a student that's doing a lot of reports, or maybe your work is spreadsheet heavy, and again, you are generating a lot of files relating to these functions in your life over things like photographs or audio recordings if you are the creative type. You might even discover that different places in your computer have different types of file, not because you follow the recommended pictures, music, etc. structure in your user folder, but rather it's because your natural workflow lends to that separation and that kind of grouping, which again will help you later on when you decide your file structure. Sure, you might already know that yeah, of course I'm a student. Of course I'm creating lots of text documents. Of course I'm creating lots of videos. I have a YouTube channel, I have a TikTok or whatever. Um, but you might be surprised at what you discover. I've done this before I set up my current system, and I was really surprised to discover that I had a surprising amount of audio recordings from the past, and those audio recordings are things that I actually wanted to keep, but I have forgotten about because they were just in a folder that I don't access regularly. Some popular options that you can use and also happen to be free options are Disk Inventory X and GAN Perspective for Mac, and Windows Stat for Windows. There are also several Linux options. Uh, More advanced users might also try TNA's Droid, which enables you to identify the software necessary to open the file, which is also another consideration, although this is a bit less visual. Take note if you have uncommon files or those that use software that requires a subscription, such as Adobe Creative Cloud, because these subscriptions need to be sustained to ensure that you have continued access to your files. And again, tools like Droid will allow you to make that identification. Um, while exploring your file system, also take the time to think about what the files mean to you. And of course, don't forget to identify um, where your files are. And what do I mean when I say don't forget to identify where your files are? So of course, um, here's a quick overview of the things that you can do um, when identifying your files. So there's the easy stuff by checking and just browsing your Explorer or Finder to see what files that you have, and then there's the more time-consuming but worthwhile activities such as using file statistics and viewing software to check um, what type of files that you have. But when I say identify where your files are, it's not simply generating these types of statistics. It's also about recognizing that, especially nowadays, our phones are pretty much stuck to our hands. We exist within several technology ecosystems. We need to account for the files we have in messaging apps, for social media, and so on. But the thing is, these platforms are not really conducive for preservation. Um, for example, when we post photographs in Facebook, Facebook automatically compresses the photograph. Um, it's the same with Instagram. When we create a document in Google Drive, we're actually creating entries on their NoSQL database and not, in fact, creating a text document, which means you can't easily create backups for that kind of document unless you export it manually one by one. So it's these considerations that make us realize, all right, these ecosystems, this software, make life a lot easier and a lot more convenient. For example, we have access to our files on the go. But um, it often means as well that we are tied to the platform. Um, Consider if you are tied to a particular ecosystem, such as that of Apple's, Google's, or even worse, Facebook. Um, and what you can do there will be to re-examine your workflow. And again, I will discuss that more later on. Now, you have a picture of where your files are. Time to get into the preservation mindset. Here's a quick overview. Whoops. uh, but let's go through it one by one. Do you know where your files are and where they are? You've assessed your files. Um, it's time to decide what to keep and what to get rid of. Remember that it's all right to let go. Make it a habit to go through your files and delete those that don't have personal meaning. Like things like the software installers I mentioned, the odd work related file you had to download and sign and send in, or even worse, print. Um, maybe old schoolwork that you find no longer relevant. Um, there's no one rule for what to keep. Just don't get into the habit of keeping everything and ending up hoarding files. Again, the more you keep, the more you hoard, the harder it will be for you to find the files that you actually need and that you actually want to keep. Try setting some criteria on usefulness depending on your motivations for preservation. If you feel uncomfortable with outright deleting files, you might consider putting them in the recycling bin and then having a scheduled delete after some time has passed. Once you are left with the files you truly find valuable, don't let them be. It's time to really get organized. So again, don't be afraid to let go. Um, really set criteria for yourself, set standards, and stick to those standards when you are assessing your files. So, you know what you want to keep? Let's define a file structure appropriate to your records. Again, there is no one standard structure. There's no one recommended structure. This really depends on what kind of files you have and what they are for. Sometimes it makes sense to make a file system separating different file types such as photographs, documents, music, and so on, especially if you find yourself generating these types of files in bulk for different purposes. So, for example, you might have photography as a hobby, you might like taking photos of things. So, it makes sense to have structured albums specifically for your photographs. Other times, it might be more appropriate to divide according to activity. For example, if you are planning things regularly for family gatherings, which might include different file formats, such as invitations, photographs, playlists, in the same folder, albeit organized in subfolders. Find the structure that works for you and stick with it. You know the structure works if you instinctively know where to put a file or can locate a file simply by following your structure, especially if you are trying to locate a file maybe a month or a few months after you originally used the structure. If you can still understand your structure after a month or so of not looking at it, then that means the structure is working for you. A tip is to remember never to mix files with folders. That is, if you have subfolders, there should not be any files alongside the subfolder, but rather inside the subfolder. So don't mix your files with folders. Make sure that every file is inside an appropriate folder. Also, avoid large clusters of files. This is problematic, especially for older computers, because it makes it difficult to search for a file and may also accelerate data corruption or cause your computer to hang, which again, if you are working on a file, might cause you to lose the file, particularly when you're dealing with photos or videos. I've had this experience with Windows, that Windows suddenly decided to overwrite several thousand photographs because there were already so many photographs there. Nobody notices if it decides to overwrite. So it's these things to consider, and it's better to use subfolders, maybe for different days, maybe for different locations, rather than dumping everything to a big photos folder. Um, Another thing to consider is your file naming. Again, there is no one file naming convention, but the important thing is that you use consistent file names that reflect the content of the file and its context. Some people like to use dates at the start of the file name. Some hate it. Some use underscores. Some use per word capitalization without spaces. Some use spaces. What's important is to find a convention that you are comfortable using. Otherwise, it becomes pointless anyway. Regardless of how good your file naming convention is, if you find yourself unable to follow that convention and unable to sustain naming your files in accordance to that convention, then it becomes pointless. Um, make sure that you find one that you are happy with and that you are comfortable with using. You might also consider a bulk rename software for photographs and albums downloaded from online. So, for example, if you are downloading a Facebook album that your friends have shared with you because you want to keep your own copy, whatever system you pick, keep following it. It's hardest the first time, but gets easier the more you get used to it. Also, don't forget to use metadata. And please avoid this type of file naming, even though you're comfortable with it. Again, find a system and stick with it. Find one that makes it work. Now, I said I will go back to metadata. File names can only do so much. File types can only do so much. Uh, Especially for videos and photographs, there's a lot more context behind the photographs simply than just the date, the name, and even what's shown on the photograph. Most modern phones and cameras are able to save location information, or you can add it to your old photos using a metadata editor. We have metadata editors built into Adobe Lightroom, for example, or you can also download a standalone metadata editor, or even simply use the built-in editors in Finder or in File Explorer. This helps a lot. You'll notice I like using photos as an example because they're really laden with meaning. And especially when you are searching for a photo you took someplace, but you can't remember the date of. We take a lot of photos every day. Maybe less not now that we're in a pandemic, but still, it becomes difficult to search for them if you're only looking through them chronologically. Um, Having extensive metadata helps a lot um, because it allows you other options when searching and when trying to retrieve a particular file you are looking for. Speaking of dates, be careful when moving files around, especially when copying or downloading files, as the date may change. And that's the reason why some people like to use um, dates in their file names, so especially for things like albums, which are time critical, but are less problematic when we're dealing with something like a text document, unless, again, there's a reason for having the date clearly stated on your text document. I tend to use dates on photographs and videos, as well as sometimes audio recordings, depending on what it's for, but not so much on my documents, because for documents, I rely more on the date modified rather than the date created. Uh, One more thing about metadata, you're not stuck to the conventional metadata, just such as GPS location, date, um, and so on. My favorite example will be the use of headings and descriptions in your files. This photo is my go-to when talking about this. At first glance, it seems like the usual photo of a meal you take before eating. Maybe to show friends what you're currently doing, or maybe to just to remember what you ate for that particular day. At first glance, it seems like a photo of food, a burger, some chips, some onion rings, and a side of coleslaw. What it doesn't show, and what would be lost if it doesn't have the proper metadata behind it, is my personal sentiments about the burger. For one, it's the best burger I've ever eaten, and involves an 8-hour round trip. Um, it's basically 1 hour of eating the burger, 8 hours traveling to get to and from the location, which also happened to be the highest mainline railway station in the UK. Especially if your reason for keeping digital records um, is to keep them as mementos. So one of the um, more frequent answers in Slido is remembering and memories and nostalgia. Do spend the time working on this metadata, adding on this metadata. You don't even have to do it photo by photo. Again, if you use a photo management software, such as Adobe Lightroom, maybe Apple Photos or Google Photos. You can do this in bulk. You can do this per album. And again, what's 5 minutes so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you can look back at it and yeah, think of the memories that you have associated with it. Did someone put here triggers to memory? But yeah, it's basically really helpful when um, it's all about keeping your files as mementos. And also, if you are using a photo management software such as Apple or Google Photos or Adobe Lightroom, like I said, you might consider enabling and training the facial recognition features. It really helps, especially, again, someone wrote mga kasama sa photo. So maybe if you have trips with friends or the barkada, you want to look for them. You want to say, oh, what was I doing with this person? And enabling that facial recognition features really helps in locating all the photos of a person, particularly in collections such as family photos and friends photos. Likewise, if you are using software like Plex, Synology DS Video, Kodi, or a similar media server, and the same goes for Apple Music and similar audio software, consider allowing it to download additional metadata and track information online. So if you're in the habit of still buying CDs and then ripping it using Apple Music so that you can listen to it, make it a habit to download the track information so that you don't just have track one, track two, track three, and then you have to remember what those files are later on. A note though and a warning on using proprietary systems locked into a particular ecosystem. These are frequently on a subscription model. So make sure you include the budget uh, for these subscriptions in your preservation plan. When possible, make sure you are able to export the files in bulk without losing the organization and metadata, and do so periodically because even if you just miss the payment one time, you might completely lose access to these files. Also, although thankfully most subscription models do give you a 1 month warning to remind you to pay, but what if you're unable to pay for that particular month? You lose all of your personal data. So make sure you're able to export. Now I said I will go back to things like direct messages and so on. For things like direct messages, your best option might be actually to migrate the chat logs to a plain text format. There are several applications for this. There's also an export feature built into Facebook, for example, or you can even do it manually if you want. Again, find a system that works for you and that you are able to do periodically. It's there's no point in just doing it one time and then forgetting about it again. Your files are not up to date. It, it becomes pointless. Um, for more difficult things, like social media history, posts in your feed, uh, music and video subscriptions, there's really not much you can do. I'm sure because of GDPR and data protection regulations, you now have the capability to export whatever data companies have about you. The problem is oftentimes that type of export is merely a database dump. And again, you still need to spend the effort to integrate it into your file structure. A better option will be to consider changing your buying habits and buying from stores that allow. So, for example, when we're dealing with music, instead of getting a Spotify subscription, and when you find that you're only listening to a specific set of artists anyway, considering downloading the music from Bandcamp, which allows you to download high quality music files for photographs, videos, and audio that you make yourself. So, for example, what about an Instagram story right before you post it? Instead of uploading directly using the Instagram story interface, consider um, changing your creation process. So Capture the video first using your camera app. It might not be as instantaneous as capturing the IG story, but that allows you then to have the better quality copy of the video or the photo um, into your photo management software, so maybe Apple Photos, rather than having to download it or save a copy of the story via Instagram, which would, of course, be already compressed to allow for sharing on social media. So it's all about that change in mindset, which may or may not, again, work for you. It's up to you to decide if these types of files are worth keeping, uh, and if you prefer the convenience of the standard process over these higher quality files for longer term preservation. And again, that depends on the purpose. Is it just something to trigger your memory? Oh, that's what I was doing um, 10 years ago. It doesn't really matter about the quality of the video as long as you're able to watch the video. So it's up to you to decide on that one. But the last stage, speaking of copies, make sure you have lots and lots of copies. As Stanford University's digital preservation guidelines put it, locks or lots of copies keep stuff safe. At a minimum, follow the 3-2-1 rule. Have at least 3 copies of your data in at least 2 different storage media with one offsite. If you have RAID, a redundant array of um, independent disk, which is often popularly built as a good backup strategy, please remember that RAID is not a backup. What RAID does, it allows for resilience against drive failure and backup. So if you lose a hard drive, if some of the files go corrupt, the RAID array is able to RAID array is redundant. The RAID is able to rebuild it and recover that file. However, it still only just counts as 1 copy, and you still need at least 2 other copies. Similarly, when using cloud storage, yes, again, cloud storage providers provide resiliency. It counts as offsite storage, but again, it only counts as just one. It is not an automatic backup, even though it's accessible across all of your devices, unless you enable the ability of cloud software to keep a local copy on your particular device. Especially when you are using software as a service, um, such as Google Workplace and Google Drive apps, consider creating files using known programs and known file formats instead, rather than using a GDoc or a G Sheet or whatever. The reason is, again, for facilitating the creation of backups. For example, when making a text document, create it and save it via Microsoft Word or Apple Pages or LibreOffice instead of creating a GDoc, so that you can easily copy, download, and move around um, that particular drive rather than um, rather than having to export each file one by one in your Google Drive. Uh, this is because some files, such as those created by Google, are not actually files but references to a virtual database. I mentioned this earlier. In contrast, using a traditional file format will allow you to bulk export and backup drives simply by copy pasting or using rsync if you're a more advanced user, or even using the visual interface in a particular backup software, maybe in your NAS or even in your standalone computer. Later on, I will show a link on screen. You can check out the Library of Congress list of recommended file formats to use. So that's a long list, not just for digital, but they also have a list for printed formats. But for our discussion, for each type of media, so textual documents, uh, visual documents, so photographs, video, and so on, they have recommended types of files. Um, Also, if your system depends on a single point of failure, you're in trouble. As you can see with Anna Robinson's expression, a loss of device should not lead to loss of files. Loss is inevitable, but proper preservation planning means accounting for failure. So, hardware failure, hardware loss, bit rot, accidental deletions, and so on. Structure your copies in such a way that duplication is automatically integrated in the process. If you are doing manual file copying, remember to always copy then delete. Never cut then paste. Um, and make sure that you make the copies in a time period appropriate to the rate by which you create new files. If you find yourself creating files every day, make it a habit that at the end of the day, you make your backups. If you're not as frequent, maybe you create 5 files within a week, then maybe a weekly backup will be the good strategy for you. Um, do make sure that the copies are up to date with each other. Otherwise, it's pointless to have a backup if one copy is 6 months behind another, unless we're talking about a fourth or a fifth copy on tape or a hard drive for deep storage. When using RAID or redundant file structure, make sure to have periodic scrubs or fixity checks running to check for deterioration or corruption. This again so that the system will be able to recognize, oh, I have a corrupted file. I'm going to restore it from my resilient copy. If you don't have a resilient file system, use checksum software such as Fixity by AV Preserve periodically to detect problem files and then restore them manually from your other backup copies. It's really important to detect this earlier on because otherwise, if you don't detect it, you'll make a copy using that primary file, and then all of your copies will now also have corrupted files, which again defeats the purpose of your backup copies. Um, I just want to share my personal workflow as an example and so that you have an idea of what you can do. So as you can see, my primary copy is the cloud. Whenever I am working on something, I save it in my iCloud file structure if it's a personal file, and in Google Workspace if it's for work. So this way, I am able to utilize the cloud's resiliency as well as access my files across any device on my network. And also, by using two different cloud systems, I am able to make a separation between personal archives and work-related stuff. Um, it also means that I am able to resume work immediately on a different device when a device fails. This actually happened last year with a 12-year-old computer. I just decided not to boot one day. No effect on operations. I just swapped to a different computer, access my files on the cloud as usual, and kept working. And this also had the convenience of fulfilling the offsite criteria in the 321 rule. Now for the next copy, copy 2, and take note of the asterisk. This is not a full copy of my files, and it's not really for personal archives, but rather it's about the current and recent files that I am using. So for the archives people, this is for my active and semi-active records. And this is done by enabling the local storage option of both iCloud and Google Drive, ensuring that I have a copy stored in my device should there be internet issues. Although, again, you should build redundancy on everything, including your internet connections and internet infrastructure. Um, One of the things to consider here is that differentiation of, all right, what am I keeping personally and what do I need to keep because I am currently working on it, because I am using it for work and so on. So you have that to consider. Um, Now, the next copy is an automated hourly time machine backup. So it's on a network server and it's dumping all of the time machine instances for. So again, it's obvious that we're talking about the Apple ecosystem here, but um, all of the MacBooks, all of the Mac Minis, and so on dumping their time machine instances into a network server, allowing me not just to protect the files, but also the software needed to access the files, especially if you're dealing with something like a virus infesting your system. Now, for personal digital archives, the stable copy is copy number 4 for my records with enduring value. So things like photo albums, personal records, legal records, and unique AV collections. These go to another network file server, um, which is done through manual periodic transfer, usually every month from the iCloud instance. Files in the servers are also further duplicated um, into an offline deep storage drive, which is my final backup copy. Consequently, depending on the importance of the file, there can be up to 6 copies available at any given time. So for the personal archives, there can be up to 5 copies, or even more if it's across different devices. Again, because local storage from Drive is enabled across different devices. Um, Less important files such as the day-to-day files don't need as many copies, so it doesn't get copied to 4 and 5, but again, it's still on copy 1, copy 2, and copy 3. So again, you're still fulfilling the 3-2-1 rule. Your own setup does not need to be this complex, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how to go about setting up your copy infrastructure and deciding how to keep your copies. Uh, Personal digital archiving is really inherently unique to each individual and their own collection of files. The key thing is finding out what works for your particular instance through experimentation, learning from mistakes, and generally keeping an open mind. Find out what works and what you can sustain and stick with it. It might take some time, it might cost some money. Not everything might work out the way you expect. You might make some mistakes along the way, but some things are worth spending the effort. All right. So thank you everyone for coming to this talk, and I hope it has given you a starting point for your personal archives. There's still a lot to discuss and a lot of options to explore, but as promised, my final slide would be to show you um, the useful links. So I'm just going to disappear. Um, the useful links that you can refer to when getting started with your own personal digital archive. So you have the DPC's Technology Watch Report on the things to consider um, when it comes to digital preservation, especially when it comes to personal archives. And often, like I said, the most frequently cause of loss in personal archives is neglect, as with any other relationship. We also have the topical note 6 on personal digital archiving, which gives some good tips on what to do, again, especially when it comes to making copies, keeping backups, and keeping a file structure. And then the one I mentioned earlier, the Library of Congress recommended formats to decide what types of files you should be keeping and you should be creating. So that's all. That's all. Hopefully this has been informative, and I will now give you back to Dridge. So Dridge, it's all yours.
Yan, wow, salamat Sir Nathan. Ayusin ko na din yung files ko, medyo makalat. Salamat po for sharing your expertise on PDA. Next time, ibang PDA naman na ituro natin kung kaya. Joke lang. So, we
We
actually
are
have
not
questions.
qualified for that, Dridge.
So, we actually have questions from our viewers and we will be addressing them in a few minutes. Sa mga nakasubaybay sa ating SOCMED at sa slides natin kanina, napansin niyo ba yung mga formats natin for this webinar? Did you notice the narrative sa mga photos na nilabas namin? Well, siguro itanong din natin yan mamaya kay Sir Nathan. But before that, for those who just tune in, this is our UP-SLIS webinar series organized by the UP School of Library and Information Studies. To our audience, if you have any questions for our speaker, you can go to slide.do and type in the code SLISPDA. You can also use the QR code shown on the screen to go to our questions page. Please check the previously posted questions and upvote questions you want to be prioritized. You can also comment on the questions if you have similar stories or experiences. So, some announcements first before we proceed para may time din kayo na mag-submit ng mga questions pa or mag-comment or mag-upvote ng mga questions. So, UPSLIS is proud to announce its new graduate program, the Master in Archives and Records Management or MARM, commencing academic year 2022-2023, the first of its kind in Southeast Asia. The MARM is a 34-unit, 2-year graduate program that provides students with the knowledge and skills required to work in and develop archives, special collections, record centers, and other memory and collecting institutions. This program addresses the need for formal education on archives and records keeping in the region necessary to support and document critical organizational decisions and activities that will help ensure efficiency, transparency, and accountability in both public and private sectors, and to help preserve and promote our cultural heritage, collective memory, and identity. The program addresses these needs by providing students with strong theoretical and practical foundations and experience on the effective, efficient, and ethical management of records and archival materials. The practical and theoretical engagements to be provided by the program will prepare the students and future archives and records professionals to be historically and culturally conscious and reflective, while further enriching their experience with information for civic engagement and participatory governance. Thus, the MARM program balances the pragmatic and business aspects of records management and the historical and cultural dimensions of archives. So visit our website, upslis.info, for more information on the program. Applications will start during the second quarter of the year. So please follow and subscribe to our social media to be alerted of the latest announcements. Or again, you can visit our website, upslis.info. Also, the UPSLIS is pleased to announce the release of the second issue of the 41st volume of the Philippine Journal of Librarianship and Information Studies, also known as PHJLIS. It is formerly known as the Journal of Philippine Librarianship or JPL. This latest issue of the PHJLIS contains articles on information literacy, critical librarianship, and health misinformation, a viewpoint article on preservation of Southeast Asian manuscripts, a review of works on social media and fake news, and an editorial piece on the progress and recent developments in the graduate education offered by UPSLIS. PHJLIS is an open access journal. You can view its issues at phjlis.org, and articles are available free for download. You may also submit your articles by logging in to the same website. If you have any inquiries, you may send an email to editor@phjlis.org. Again, that's editor@phjlis.org. Also, thank you to those who have already purchased our SLIS coffee table book. For those of you who have no copies yet, you can now pre-order for our next print run by going to bit.ly/SLISCTB. Again, that's bit.ly/SLISCTB. Again, also for those of you who have fond memories of UPSLIS or ILS or ILIS, ano man yung naabutan nyo, we also want to know your best, funniest, weirdest, oddest, scariest, sappiest memories in SLIS. Ano man yung mga memories na meron kayo, we want to have that through a project called #IRemember. If you have something that you want to share, please go to iremember.upslis.info. You might also want to check out our 60th anniversary online exhibition at 60.upslis.info. Also, the Kaagapay project for UP BLIS students of the UP Library Science Alumni Association or UPLSAA is still ongoing. We want to ensure that every BLIS student is equipped with the required tools or gadget for remote learning. The Kaagapay project is in support of the program of the UP system, Kaagapay sa pag-aaral ng mga scholar ng bayan. You may donate in cash or in kind to help our BLIS students who may be struggling with remote learning. You may send your inquiries to uplsaa.inc@gmail.com. That's uplsaa.inc@gmail.com. Finally, UPSLIS is still accepting donations for the construction and renovation of our new SLIS building. Here is your opportunity to contribute to UPSLIS and LIS education in the country. For your donations or other inquiries, you may contact us via email at admin@slis.upd.edu.ph. Again, that's admin@slis.upd.edu.ph. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our twitch.tv, and like our Facebook page, UPSLIS. That's UPSLIS on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. So Shout out sa mga viewers natin ngayon. So kung hindi pa kayo nakapag-like sa Facebook natin, sa YouTube natin, or mas gusto niyo sa Twitch, follow lang kayo. So ayan, nandito na rin si Sir Nathan. Let's look at the questions posted on Slido. So, ang nasa top question po ngayon ay, and hindi ko sure kung tama ba pagkakabasa ko dito kasi hindi ko na alam to, what are your thoughts on Sinology NAS? That's what are your thoughts on Sinology NAS?
Yan. So earlier on, I mentioned that RAID is not a backup, but RAID is great for resiliency. And Synology NAS is one of the more popular brands. We have QNAP, we have some other off-the-shelf NAS options, but Synology thus far has the biggest market share. Um, of course, this is not an endorsement for any brand, especially since they're not sponsoring us. But in the past, I've had good experiences with Synology, both on a business scale, so their network servers, and also on a personal scales. I'm currently deploying two Synology servers personally, so I have good experiences with them. They have some products that aren't really that good, but it's more because of the specification of the product and because of the cost and economics involved. As with any other technology, do evaluate what you are buying and make sure that it's fit for your particular purpose. And you're the best person to be able to answer that. What exactly do you want to use it for?
Thank you very much, Sir Nathan. So here's the next question. Do you have any advice on passing or inheriting the PDA of family members who died or will die? What are the things that we need to prepare? Actually, may mga nag-comment na rin po dito. Ang nabanggit lang dito ay sa Apple, if you're using iCloud, may legacy at security features na siya to pass on your PDA. Pero in case po sa ibang platforms, ano po yung advice ninyo on passing on or inheriting the PDA of family members or to other people?
So we can discuss this bridge in two perspectives. One is from the perspective of the person who owns these archives, and then one is from the perspective of the people who one plan to is intended to inherit the collection. Um, from the perspective of the person that owns the PDA, you really need to prepare. Prepare to die. Basically. Because, like I said, walang mahiwagang baul. Especially when we are dealing with digital records, these are behind passwords. If you are security conscious, your drives might contain encryption. And you need to make sure you have a mechanism of letting your family members know, all right, when I pass away, these are my passwords. These drives are encrypted. Don't attempt to open them, otherwise they will self-delete. Or it might be the decision that, again, the predominant response in my poll earlier was it's more remembrance, it's more for personal use, it's more for reminiscing. And the decision might actually be no, I don't want you to access my personal files. And so what I want you to do when I die is I want you to delete and wipe all of my hard drives and delete all of my accounts online, which again is a perfectly good option from your perspective. From the perspective of the family members who might already be dealing with these types of situation, again, there's only so much you can do. Given the framework, so for example, with Apple, with Facebook, it really depends on the consent of the person that the records about or who owns the records. If you don't have that, might as well request for the records to be deleted. Or again, if you don't know the password, don't guess it. What would the person involved want you to do with the records? So same with letters, same with physical journals. How do you think would they want you to treat the digital records? The handling of digital records might be different because of the considerations I mentioned earlier, but fundamentally, these are still archives. And the ethical considerations behind dealing with archives remain the same regardless of whether they are physical or digital. So it all boils down to respect to communication and to preparing for such an eventuality. If the eventuality has already passed and we are dealing with legacy records, maybe you're trying to create a family archive, then that's a different story. We'll be happy to have a discussion with you about that, and we do offer services through UPSLIS to assist families in creating and establishing family archives. So get in touch with us.
And thank you very
I
much, sir.
promote.
In related po dun sa sagot ninyo, meron din actually dito na nagtanong. I'm assuming when they ask, how do we deal with licensing? And also here's a comment na medyo nakalimutan daw ating halaga na pag-encrypt. I think connected siya dun sa sagot ninyo kanina. I think this goes, how do we deal with licensing siguro ng softwares or hardware na ginamit? Or how do we deal with licensing kapag ipapasa na yung document sa ibang tao? And I think maybe we also need to take this opportunity to talk more on sa encryption, kung paano siguro tayo nag-encrypt or ano yung pwede natin gawin to secure our data, especially kung ipapasa na natin siya sa iba.
Okay. So actually, I disagree with the commenter. So, ito pa naman yung pinaka-importante. No, it's copies that are most important. Encryption is about security. And again, that is highly subjective and highly contextual. And it's like the previous question when you are dealing with family records. What is the purpose of your collection? If it's meant to be for yourself, then by all means, encryption is very important. If the purpose is for sharing, then it's pointless to encrypt the local files since you will be sharing them anyway. An overall larger network security mindset and file security mindset is a lot more important than hardware encryption or software encryption. Although, again, it really depends on the purpose. If your purpose is highly personal, then by all means, go ahead and encrypt. Uh, as regards to licensing, here's the question. What personal digital archives are you keeping that has issues with licensing that you have not pirated? Um, when in general, when we deal with personal digital archives, we are talking about the records that are unique to us. So things like photographs that we've taken. Maybe the biggest licensing issue we will encounter will be things like audio collections and music collections. But again, the licensing issue, especially for music, is very complicated, particularly when you are negotiating the notion of the ownership of a CD, and then having the rip copy, which is allowed by law, so as to enable your access to the CD. So the licensing there would be who inherits the CD, who owns the CD. But for things like DVDs, things like video collections. Again, it's the question of do you own the rights to keep that record in the first place, or, especially when you're using something like a Plex server. Um, and instead, are you um, are you merely integrating other accounts so as to have one single portal for all of your personal videos, but also your Netflix subscriptions, your HBO Plus, and so on. In general, a good attitude to take would be if someone else owns the rights to a file, and if a file can be easily accessed elsewhere, so things like films, things like when I say films, commercial films, when I say music tracks, then the best attitude will be just to continue your subscriptions rather than trying to download it potentially illegally into your personal file structures. Um, on the opposite side will be things like home videos, things like random audio recordings that you decide to create with your friends because they were in the mood to sing. Then that's a completely different thing because you own the rights to those types of things. So basically respect intellectual property and don't make it hard for yourself. Why bother preserving pirated videos when you're paying for cloud storage anyway? Might as well pay for maybe a streaming subscription instead. So it's a bit of a complex discussion, but it all boils down to ethics and law.
Ayan. Thank you very much, Sir Nathan. Again, to our viewers, if you have any questions, you may post it by going to slido.com and typing in the code SLISPDA. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to directly go to the questions website. So, sir, speaking of being subjective and all of this licensing talk, there's a question here. What are your thoughts on NFTs and how do they figure into digital archives?
They don't. They're being on the digital archives. Why? When you buy an NFT or when you own an NFT, what do you own? Do you actually own the digital file or do you only own the token? The way NFTs work is that you own the token and the tokens reference a file hosted by someone else in an external server. And aside from the ethical and environmental issues of blockchain in the first place, there's also the concern that the sustainability of NFTs is not dependent on the chain and not dependent on the tokens, but are rather dependent on the uptime of the servers that actually host the files. And unfortunately, the only thing and the only person that can solve that will be the people that maintain those files. You don't have control over those servers, and then when they are gone, they're gone. Your token doesn't mean anything if if it's a dead link, and that has been a phenomenon even before blockchain. Even in the early days of the internet, the Library of Congress has a study that web pages and web links don't even last more than 100 days. Even the evaluation form for this webinar won't last more than 100 days. We'll be taking it down after a month or so. So I don't support NFTs. They're really hard to preserve. And that's on top of already the existing ethical and environmental concerns that they have.
And thank you very much. So speaking of expensive NFTs, there's a question here. How much are you spending on your PDA?
Um, some memories are um, some memories you can't put a price on. For everything else, there's inabot mo pa ba yung advert na yun?
Ballpark figure.
So I won't say the actual figure kasi minsan hindi ko yun monitor and it changes from month to month. But in general, the costs involved will be the monthly costs for cloud storage. Thankfully, yung sa work side, UP provides it as an educational thing. So yung work files, hindi siya problem. It's the personal files that is expensive kasi aside for, so ito yun eh, the reason it's hard to quantify is it's not just the cost of the subscriptions. It's also the electricity costs. Running servers, running backup generators, buying petrol for backup generators, running backup, running your backup network infrastructure, running your network servers 24/7, cost electricity. So again, environmental impact medyo, which is why some people really advocate for serverless computing, which is mainly putting mostly everything on the cloud. Kasi nga, it has less environmental impact and therefore less electricity costs and so on. Pero it really depends kasi in the summer, electricity costs more, air conditioning costs more. And then every now and again, you have to keep buying new drives. You need to keep upgrading your cloud storage because you're accumulating more files. So it's not a matter of saying, this is how much I'm spending on my monthly PDA, but this is how much my memories mean to me, and it's worth whatever I need to do to keep them and to be able to preserve them. Medyo cop-out answer, pero that's the reality of things. Sometimes you just can't put a value on the things that matter the most. Hashtag hugot.
Hashtag priceless. So, in connection with that, sir, ito, pagsabayin ko na itong dalawang tanong. Kasi there's a question here na, What's your recommended compromise for backup storage? We can afford multiple physical drives and cloud subscriptions. Kasi medyo magastos nga daw. And itong isang question na rin siguro connected naman siya na what's the free best Windows and Android apps that you could recommend for file management and file backup if meron man?
Okay, unahin ko muna yung free apps. So I mentioned the file characterization, pero ang tanong kasi dito is file management. For file management, the best software you can use will be dependent on the files that you have. If you are dealing mostly with a folder structure, Finder will be your best. Finder Windows. File Explorer will be your best free app kasi it allows you to visualize your file structure and it allows you to manage your files. Of course, File Explorer will be best for things like it will be best for things like textual documents. For things like photographs and videos, madami namang open source applications for managing it. So I mentioned Plex earlier. Hindi ko pa mention, pero there's also this thing called collective access, which is really great for managing your photo collections. But the thing is, whenever we're talking about free, ito yung downside niya. It's free in terms of cost. It's not free in terms of the required knowledge to set it up, the requirements to maintain it, and of course, again, the electricity cost and so on. So yes, you can use collective access. You can use things like Plex, but you need to spend the time to learn how to manage a Windows server, for example, or how to keep server instance. Although thankfully, kung LAS student ka, pinag-aaralan yan sa LAS 160 series. And if you're not, just reach out to us, tutulungan ka namin to get it set up. Yung file backup, so puntahan naman natin. And then, yun nga, related sa storage is never free. There's no such thing as a storage option that is free. A lot of sites, so Amazon, Backblaze, have free tiers. But that's what, 10 gigabytes or so? Who has digital archives that is less than a terabyte nowadays? Especially photos nyo pala, with the resolutions of modern phones, maybe that would be the recommended compromise. If you don't find yourself printing out your photographs and you don't find yourself zooming in really closely to your photographs, the recommended compromise is not actually regarding the storage, but the files you generate. Bawasan yung files, reduce the resolutions, and then make your criteria for preservation stricter. And be stricter on what you decide to keep. Kasi on the storage side, there is no such thing as free storage. Even if you're not paying for a cloud subscription, you still need to pay for hard drives. And kaya nga pinalitan yung pangalan ng RAID from inexpensive disks to independent disks. Kasi hindi inexpensive ang disks. It might be relatively inexpensive sa mga server people, pero for us personal users, we really need to spend sa drives. And in fact, a lot of my experiences, personal experience with loss, with data loss, was because I did not have the money to pay for a drive. There was this one time na I lost my entire music collection because I was reusing an old hard drive kasi wala na akong space. Ang problema, that old hard drive also had the active copies ng iba kong files. But thankfully, because 3-to-1 rule, it was just a copy na recover ko yung ibang files. But because for me, hindi worth copying and keeping yung music collection because I own the physical CDs anyway. Ang pinaka nawala sa akin is the time and effort used to rip all of those CDs. So I didn't really lose the music. I still have them in CDs somewhere. But then it's all that time lost because I compromised, because I didn't want to spend on storage. Unfortunately, you really need to pay for storage. There is no such thing as free storage in this world. Sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear. Although you're asking about compromises, do keep a minimum of 3 copies. Um, One option you can do will be creating a local cloud instead of subscribing to an online cloud. But again, a local cloud such as OneDrive will require you to understand how to create a server infrastructure within your own house. It's actually not that hard if you do your research, but again, these things are compromises. Um, if you want to save on something, you risk something else.
Yeah. Thank you, Sir Nathan. So, yun guys, kung magko-compromise kayo, wag dun si storage itself, but rather, siguro kailangan nating bawasan yung kalat natin. Mary Kondo style. So, dami nating tanong. Pero kung meron pa kayong gustong itanong, post lang kayo, go to slido.com and type in the code SLISPDA. Again, that's slido.com, type in the code SLISPDA. So, here's our next question, Sir Nathan. Kasi na-discuss natin kanina na when we are doing our PDA, gagawa tayo ng categories natin, tapos ilalagay natin sa folders and file. And there's question here, how do we file documents that fall under multiple categories in the file structure? So what if daw yung file is pasok naman siya sa multiple categories?
Pwede bang pilosopong sagot? Eh di mali yung file structure mo. Actually, yun. Kasi again, di ba, find something that works for you. If you find na hindi ka makadecide saan ilalagay yung file mo, that means the file structure is not working for you. And again, it's all about that consistency. Na set clear criteria on what makes a file fall under a particular structure. Don't mix and match. Huwag kayong magawa ng isa about activities, tapos biglang may file type based na structure, and so on. If you are deciding on categories in your file structure, make sure na consistent siya. If it's functional decomposition na depende sa activities na ina-undergo nyo as an individual. So for example, baka mamaya mayroon kayong specific category on volunteering, on family matters, on legal records, on schoolwork, etc. Kailan nag-i-intersect yun kapag yung volunteering is school-related? So, again, decide what the dominant category is. And it, again, depende yan sa ano yan, depende yan sa records niya. And if malinaw yung categories ninyo, it shouldn't be that much of a problem. If may specific category ka na iniisip that we can help you with, put it on the question, sagutin natin mamaya. But it really depends on you and how you categorize.
And thank you very much, Trini.
And if you need help in doing that, I believe we are offering some of our information organization courses as free electives if you're not LAS students. So just hop onto UP Diliman CLS and check out our LAS 6X courses.
And if you're a working professional, maybe consider taking up our MARM program later on this year. So, yun. So, sir, our next question is, I think this is expanding outwards na ng personal digital archiving. Someone is asking, going beyond personal, how can we convince our colleagues and perhaps even our organizations to develop a digital archive? And I think related na rin dito yung isa dito na how can we expand our personal archives into groups or community archives? So siguro, yeah.
Okay. So, eto muna, no? Going beyond personal. It's really about inculcating the record-keeping mindset within the organization. So the mindset should not just be about going digital. It shouldn't just be about digitalization, but it should be about understanding the needs of the organization and how certain initiatives and consequently change in workflows, digitalization process, and so on will help the organization achieve its mission and vision. Yun naman lagi yun eh. Although, of course, obviously, na-appreciate natin bakit important ang isang digital archive for an organization. But the best route you can convince an organization to adapt, even archives in general, is to make them appreciate the value of the records, maybe for institutional identity and heritage. Usually, ang strategy yan is, may parating ba na anniversary na divisible by 10? kung gipit divisible by 5, pwede na din. Pwede ba? May bang malapit? And can we convince na, hey, we need a digital archive so that we can create an exhibition for that coming anniversary. Kung wala naman, medyo malayo-layo pa ang anniversary o bago pa yung organization, ang tactic dyan will be, how can a digital archive assist us in efficiency or lowering costs? So, mas matagal ba mag-process ng mga records kapag paper-based sila? Malamang. And how can you demonstrate that? So, dyan papasok ang time and motion study mo, dyan papasok ang conversations with the different departments, and it's also a matter of identifying blockers. Na, bakit may tutol ang mga tao sa digital archive? Is it just the cost? So, yung nga ayaw mag-invest sa infrastructure, which, again, you need to, kasi otherwise, hardware costs money. If you don't invest in the hardware, wala kang magagawa. Is that the blocker? And then how can you locate funding opportunities for that? Kung hindi naman, is it a literacy issue? Is it hesitance because of certain trauma and so on? And again, it's the question of how you address those kinds of concerns. Now, yung other concerns naman na expanding, again, babagsak yan sa motivation mo. When you are dealing with personal archives and turning it into a collective archive, it's really a matter of connecting with like-minded people. Because after all, that's what community archives are. Community archives are archives established by individuals with a shared identity and with a shared agenda. Usually agenda-based, community-based participatory archives. And it's connecting with those people and establishing, all right, what records do we have in common and what records reflect our shared identity, our imagined community. Ni Benedict Anderson. Hi, Ma'am Aya. Pero, flashback ba sa ano? Flashback ba sa... pero, yun. It's a matter of finding that connection and agreeing what you want to keep. And then, yun, pupunta ka ngayon. Yung process ng binanggit ko kanina. Assess, decide what to keep, organize, make copies. Fundamentally, it's the same process. Pero it's a matter of establishing that relationship, establishing that connection with like-minded individuals. A word of warning though, not all personal archives are appropriate to community archives. It really depends on finding the community to which you belong in. Kasi after all, baka mamaya, yun nga, ang photos mo puro pagkain, po ano, and it might be better placed into a Facebook page or a WhatsApp chat ng I'm actually part of a WhatsApp chat na ang laman lang niya ay puro pictures of animals. And it's not worthy of preservation. It's just something that we find cute and relaxes us at the end of the day. So that might be what you were thinking of. And it might not be worth the effort and expense of establishing a formal archive. But again, it's about finding that connection with a particular community. So hopefully, nasagot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Nathan. Again, for our viewers, if you have any question, you may post it by going to slido.com and typing in the code SLISPDA. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to directly go to the questions website. So speaking of sharing to our community, may nagtanong po dito, what's the alternative to mainstream social medias to freely share our collections to others while maintaining our personal archives and security? Tapos may nag-comment din po, dapat mga decentralized na social media ang gamitin at hindi mga centralized na pinagkakitaan ng data. So any comments po on that?
Okay, there are a lot of ethical considerations when it comes to this question. Decentralized social media has hit the news recently because of the way they have assisted in promoting misinformation, encouraging echo chambers, and also assisting things like insurgency and protests. which may or may not be a good thing depending on the cause you are fighting for. Um, so there are good things about alternative social media platforms. But the thing is, remember, when regardless of what social media you are talking about, someone has to maintain that. And babalik tayo, ano ba yung motivation nila to do that in the first place? Is it truly a benevolent motivation, understanding that it costs a lot of money to pay for server space, to pay for programmers to maintain these networks, um, versus yung versus using mainstream media, which might be using your data to train the AI, to train new services. But so, for example, things like facial recognition. Yes, they might be using our photos to um, train facial recognition software. But on the other hand, it allows us to easily locate photos of people we want to locate the photos of. Lalong-lalo na when it comes to, birthday ni ganito, kailangan ko ng birthday greeting, anong magandang photo ang gamitin, and then isa-search mo lang yung lahat ng photos niya na na-recognize. So really, it's a matter of what you find more valuable, and if you are willing to take the risk, and if you babalik sa community archives na if you share the same vision of that particular social media platform. There was this group, especially for alternative communities, na humiwalay from Tumblr when Tumblr increased its regulations. And madaming na form na different alternative sites. Recently, another good example would be OnlyFans and the development of alternative websites to OnlyFans. And that's the same with any other type of social media, whether for profit, for certain types of purposes, or for sharing with friends. Do you believe in the vision of a particular site? Then by all means, go ahead and use that site, support that site, donate to that site. Otherwise, ito yun eh, even from an SLIS context, as the information officer of UP SLIS, one of the things I find most difficult is managing SLIS Facebook page. Kasi ang pangit ng interface ni Facebook. Facebook, nahihinig mo ako. Ang pangit ng interface ni Facebook. And they keep changing it. But the problem is, because the people are there, if we want to connect with you guys, we have to connect with you guys to Facebook because you are using Facebook. So at the end of the day, if your friends are not using the alternative site, you're just one person trying to rebel against the world, and then nobody's listening to what you're saying. Translation, Google Plus. If you've gone to Google Plus nung early days na nilaunch siya ni Google, and ngayon, it's mainly businesses and Google Workspace that uses Google Plus. But back then, we were quick to shift to it kasi, it's an alternative against Facebook. But then nobody used it, and people are still on Facebook. People are still on WhatsApp. So, nandun din yung concern na yun eh, na yes, it's all about personal independence and security, but at the same time, bakit ka ba nasa social media? Diba, it's to connect, it's to be social. And if other people are not using it, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Nathan. Speaking of security, feeling ko kailangan natin bumalik din sa usapan po ng encryption kanina. May nag-send lang po kasi ng comment for our audience for participation na pwede naman mag-encrypt basta i-share mo lang ang key sa pamilya mo. Ito kasi ang madalas makalimutan ng mga tao, mag-upload sa G Drive pero hindi na encrypt. Ibig sabihin, mababasa ito ni Google at magagamit nito sa surveillance capitalism. And may another reply saying na natutunan ko po ito sa isang webinar tungkol sa privacy sa ITDC. Ito yung ITDC.
Ayun. So, it's an interesting point kasi pupunta na tayo sa politics of information and also tawag dito country-specific legislation. For example, I am confident with using the particular services that I'm using because my particular accounts are ring fenced within the European Union and subject under the General Data Protection Regulation. And I trust, so the structure of trust and political institutions, I trust these institutions, especially the Information Commissioner's Office, to safeguard my interests and protect my files and enforce the terms of service that these particular services, so Google Workspace, um, tawag dito, iCloud, and so on, have in relation to my files. So it's the concept of ring fencing. It's the concept of who has access to it. And especially with Google, ilang levels ang kanilang information security. So that's one perspective. How much do you trust this institution? And then, of course, the opposite will be notions of distrust, notions of surveillance capitalism, and especially in the US and with companies held in the US, we see this. We also see this in applications. So things like WhatsApp, supposedly end-to-end encryption. So again, that's the problem with terms like encryption. WhatsApp supposedly has end-to-end encryption. But then you chat about something with a friend, and then 5 minutes later, may kita mo sa Instagram na may ad ka about that thing you were talking about. Ano nagawa ng encryption mo about that? And then at the end, encryption is a big risk to digital preservation kasi oftentimes nawawala ng mga tao ang kanilang encryption keys. Password nga hindi na matandaan ng tao eh. At least ang password pwedeng ma-recover. Ang encryption key, pag nawala mo yan, forever lost na sa'yo yung file. And then again, for example, when a drive is encrypted, and then yun nga, ang intention mo is ma-inherit ng family members mo kasi family photos pala yung nasa drive. If that's encrypted and then nawala yung key, wala ka na. Information security has a place. Data protection has a place. Encryption has a place. But it really depends on your particular context and it really depends on your particular trust of the institution. If you really distrust services like Google Drive, etc., then your better option might be to implement your own system using open source software and using encryption that you yourself have set to something like Backblaze or something like Amazon Web Services or IBM Cloud Services. Kasi if you distrust the institution, regardless of what you do, you can even go so far as to say, okay, in-encrypt mo nga, but they have supercomputers. They can eventually decrypt what I have encrypted. So it's a balancing act, really. Na how much do you want to preserve personal digital records? And if you distrust these institutions that much, the better approach might be to establish your own systems, establish your own networks, mag-set up ka ng sarili mong end-to-end na backup in an off-site place, maybe at work na mayroon kang so kanina binanggit ang Synology. Synology has hyper backup. And ang ginagawa ni hyper backup, it allows you to back up to another Synology NAS. Maybe nasa bahay ng friend mo, tapos pareho kayo may distance sa Google. And then yan, mag-share kayo ng files across those different network storage servers. Pero yun talaga, it's a balancing act. Paranoia has a place, and it's true that we have surveillance capitalism. It's true that sometimes these big companies misuse our information. But to what extent should we be paranoid? And to what extent should we embrace the ecosystem? And with the understanding that, oh, all right, they use my photos for training AI. They use my photos if given a court order to prove that I was someplace. Okay. I don't really have that much to hide versus, oh, actually, I don't want them knowing about that. I might keep it someplace else. So, balancing act. But of course, another thing with encryption will be with regards to data breaches and hacking. One of the main reasons you will use encryption is if you are keeping your information, your personal records, in a place that is easily hacked. Or even not just, even cloud services can be hacked. Um, so um, what's the term? One of the motivations for using encryption is not so much surveillance capitalism. It's not so much these big companies look at your data, but rather it's to prevent against hackers using that data if your cloud storage is compromised, if someone hacks into your local server, and so on. And that's one instance na encryption really helps. But yun nga, don't lose your key with each passing day. And treat a key as another digital record, which again needs multiple copies. Because if you lose the key with your encryption, say goodbye to your files. Yan.
Ayan, thank you, Sir Nathan. So, moral lesson, guys, importante ang trust at pagiging secure bago mag-PDA. So, going back to PDA, nabanggit po natin kanina, Sir, during the talk itself na another way to organize our documents or files is to manage its metadata. So, meron pong nagtanong po dito na how does one edit and manage document metadata?
Madami. So, like I said, you can use your default file browser, so Finder, File Explorer, to access document metadata. A lot of file-specific software. So if you have a music player, if you have a video player, you can even manage your video metadata in VLC. When you are dealing with photographs, Adobe Lightroom, Photoshop can do it. Google Photos, Apple Photos can do it. It really depends on what software you are using. Most software nowadays that are meant to manage a specific type of file can directly manage the metadata for that type of file. Kung gusto mo naman na mas general na metadata manager, there are also software like that. You can look at the GUI version of XF tool. XF tool is a command line data manager that we use in archives kasi it's great for bulk operations. But of course, for personal use the GUI version. And then, marami ding ibang open source na metadata managers.
Ayan, thank you very much, Sir Nathan. And for our final question, wala nang kahabol, a very appropriate final question. Sir, any recommendation about to begin pa lang po? So I guess any advice or any quick tips for those na very minimal talaga yung knowledge about sa mga pinag-usapan natin? How can they begin?
As with any other PDA, isipin mo muna kung handa ka pa talaga. So, yun nga, di ba? The very first thing to do will be to assess and identify what files you have. It begins with that. It begins with assessment. It begins with setting the criteria. Set your standards. Sabi nga, di ba? Kasi if you set your standards, it allows you to decide the rest of your strategy. So, depending on your motivation, depending on your criteria, may intindihan mo how you will categorize the file structure. Depending on your standards, you will understand how many copies you need to make. Depending on your standards, you will understand tawag dito, where to keep the records. So, yung mahabang discussion natin on trust and cloud storage and encryption and so on. It really depends on what files you want to keep. So the first thing to do, if you are just about to begin, will be to get an idea of what files you actually have. So use the software I mentioned, things like Gantt Perspective, WinDirStat, Disk Inventory X, and so on. And get started with assessing your files.
Ayan. Thank you very much, Sir Nathan. Thank you so much, Sir Nathan, for answering our viewers' question. So, sagutin mo naman yung question ko ngayon. Do you have any upcoming talks or projects that you want to promote sa ating viewers?
Ayan. So far, I don't have any upcoming talks. Projects though, at the moment, I'm working on two. UPSLIS is currently working with PUP on a project regarding preserving creative works done during the pandemic. So if you're an artist, or even if you're an individual na you find yourself writing poems, creating artwork to relax, stay tuned for that project kasi there will be a call for submissions if you want to share the works. And para ma-preserve din siya courtesy of the NCCA. And also, on my data protection persona, um, I am currently exploring how small and less formal organizations, shall we say, can best deal with data protection. Kasi often when we talk of data protection, laging may mindset of bureaucracy and ano yan eh, ang mindset mo lagi is structured organizations. So if you are a small organization interested in talking about how you deal with data protection and exploring how you comply with, for example, RA 10170 requirements, while not being a big organization that can afford a dedicated data privacy officer and so on, do get in touch. I would love to have a chat with you about it.
Yan. So again, thank you very much, Sir Nathan. We wish you the very best in all of your endeavors. So again, sa lahat ng mga nanonood, thank you so much sa pagsama sa amin, and we hope na marami kayong natutunan sa experience natin for this webinar. So thank you also to our SLIS faculty for making this event possible. Special shout out to our hardworking and ever reliable tech team. Professor Nathan Isip, na siya rin yung nag-talk kanina, galing. Professor Mark Santos and Professor Dan Dorado for managing the tech side of this event. To Professor Yuan Frederick Cabab and myself, Rachel Reyes, for our work on the graphics and publicity materials. And of course, Professor Paul Jason Perez, head of the SLIS at 60 Committee, and our Dean, Professor Mary Grace P. Golfo Barcelona. Shout out na din sa registration team natin, headed by the Office of the College Secretary, Professor Wina Santos, and Ms. Oda Meriton, along with our Student Council and volunteers headed by Cespin Ventura. Kita-kits ulit bukas sa ating registration help desk. So, siguro opportunity na rin, shoutout na rin sa family ko, nanonood daw sila ngayon, dagdag viewers din yan. Maraming salamat, like and subscribe. And ayun, so shoutout na rin sa lahat ng nanonood. So, for everyone to give feedback and to request a certificate, please don't forget to register using the link shown on screen. This link will be only active for a month. So 1 month lang po yan. So make sure to fill out the form before it expires. You can still leave an evaluation at any time. So kung gusto niyo ng certificate, please within the month, sagutan niyo ito. If you miss portions of this webinar or may gusto kayong balikan na discussion natin, you may rewatch this as a Facebook video or check out our YouTube channel. For updates on our upcoming activities, please follow us at our official Facebook page, UPSLIS. Subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch channels, youtube.com/UPSLIS and twitch.tv/UPSLIS, or visit our website, upslis.info. You can also catch our online talk shows on YouTube. For the record, Faculty Room, the student-produced digital scholarship lecture series, Coffee Break, Reflections, and Conversations. Andun ako, kita-kits doon. And of course, the Off the Record, a student-led spin-off of our For the Record series that discusses key concepts in archives and records management. If you like our videos on social media, don't hesitate to share it. Pa-like and heart na rin para mayroon tayong communication kahit paano. Comment din kayo, free lang yan. So ayun, kita-kits ulit next month for our next webinar Wednesday offering. Watch out sa aming mga social media channels for announcement of further details. So, that wraps up our webinar Wednesday, episode 2 for the year 2022. So once again, this is Rachel Reyes, your host and moderator, signing off.